Hi guys, my name is Vanessa Smedley and I am a painter. Today we're going to go back to the basics again and I'm going to continue my little series on beginning techniques, and I'm going to show you techniques for creating texture in your work. There's a lot of little tricks that watercolorists employ in order to do textures more easily and without having to paint every little detail. And it can be very useful for a beginner to have, or anybody really. So let's do this. All right, so I'm going to show you 3 separate techniques for textures. The first one is splattering, and you can do it 2 different ways. I'm going to show you that real quick. You can do it with a toothbrush like this. You want to cover up your sky a little bit so that you don't get it everywhere. But you can take your thumb and do like this, and that will give you some more texture into this grass area. Or you could take your brush and do the same type of thing, but like this. I use my finger as a stop and I just put it in there, and that adds a lot of different texture to greenery, to rocks, to all kinds of stuff. You can also take your finger and do a directional splat like this. I'm not going to do it on that one right now. The other thing that you can do for texture here in this grass foreground here is you can take the back of a sharp brush or the edge of a store card that you've cut or a stick, anything like that, and just score it in there. And as the paint dries, it will, the paint will sink into those scores, and it will cause a darker texture. You can start to see it happening right now, actually. So we're just making stems right now of the wildflower. You can also drag it out like that. You can drag the paint with it to make more little stems up there. So you can do that. And then the third texture, that's called scoring. And then the third texture I'm going to do is using salt. So this is just regular table salt. And I'm going to grab it and start putting it in little clumps to represent wildflowers here. Sometimes it works fantastic, sometimes it doesn't. So you kind of just have to wait until it dries to see if it worked the way that you wanted it to. Now this entire foreground is wildflowers, so I'm kind of going a little bit more overboard than I normally would, probably, because you don't want to just cover everything up with that. But we're gonna let that dry, and then we'll see what kind of effect we got. So here's what this looks like dry. You can see that the salt worked absolutely perfectly, and what it does is it basically just draws all the moisture to itself, and effectively it lifts the paint off and makes these kind of interesting patterns. So this has worked great. You would just brush any salt residue off like that. And you know, that's good to go. You can come back in and add more detail in there in the bottom if you would like to. I'm going to leave it pretty much as is. Okay, so now I'm going to show you 2 different ways to make a rock texture, because I have a nice little mountain landscape here. It's really just a sketch, but anyways, I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do a rock type texture, one of which is a wax resist, and I'm just using this tiny little piece of wax that I have here that I got out of like a little tea light, kind of like this, and I am going to just place it along some of the areas that I want to kind of remain white. Just kind of scrape it along the surface the places that you want to remain white or to have that texture. Okay. The other texture I'm going to show you, I'll have to put the paint on and then show you what I'm going to do with it. So for this rock area, I am going to be using a mixture of Payne's Gray and brown, transparent brown oxide, I think is what it is, to come along here and just drop in some of these steps. I'm going to try to keep these two sides separate so that you can see what they do. Some just plain Payne's Gray to some of these areas to give it some variation. Might even add in some places where it's just brown. And I'm gonna take the edge of an old store card, rounded edge. And I've cut the other edge to make a sharp edge, but I'm gonna take the rounded edge and I'm gonna start scraping this paint. Some of that already dried out a little bit. But as you can see, it makes a very interesting texture because it scrapes some of the paint off, and then the darker areas stay dark. And it's an easy way to do like a rock texture. And what you would do at this point is you would go back in and add some shadows and details in certain areas to make it more obvious. So that is what it looks like to scrape. And then if you come in here on the other side and you do kind of the same thing, but you've got the wax resist, you come in and you start to put this in here, and you can see that the wax that we put in earlier is resisting the paint. So it adds texture in that way. Could have put more of it in there, but that you can see like right there where it's resisting. And then you can just come up and you can make some more little details in it. And you can add on the other side too, you can add some more shadows to the shadowy side, obviously shadowy side, to the darker sides of these. That may have been a little dark, but anyway. And now you can see that texture a little bit more on the wax. And that is what it looks like dry, just so you can see the finished product. Okay, so next I'm going to show you two different effects, the first of which is using Saran Wrap or cling film, depending on which country you're from. That's this stuff, you know, your everyday plastic wrap, like that. We're going to use that to make a rock texture. So I have this background wet for already. We're going to do some wet on wet. I'm just going to start dropping in some color in some of these areas. This is a cave if you can't quite see it yet, and we're looking out, and so we've got a lot of rock texture all around, and so I'm just going to start dropping in color. This is a mixture of transparent brown oxide and Payne's gray. I may have some other colors mixed in, but I don't really remember. And then I'm going to add another mixture of that same color, but those same colors, but it has a little bit of alizarin crimson in it. I'm going to add Payne's gray by itself. Some really darker areas. And you can see I already did this effect earlier on the inner part of that, the lip of that rock, but I'm showing you now what I did for that, so it's the same thing. I just didn't want to have to do it in two different levels for you. So then I think I want to add in some ultramarine blue, because there's quite a bit of blue up in this area. Just blue here and there. And then I'm going to come back in with some burnt sienna over here where it's warmer, where the sunlight's coming through. Right now it looks like a total mess, but you know, I mean, a rock area always does when you have a bunch of different colors mixed around together. And here is some transparent brown oxide. I think I'm going to come back in with some Payne's gray, because that's actually more of a cool area right there. Okay. So once you get all your colors laid in where you want them, this has a little bit too much water, so I'm taking a little bit of it out right there. I might add a little bit of yellow ochre to some areas too, because there's a lot of yellow ochre in rock. Just here and there. Might want a little bit more Payne's gray right here, because there's a darker area there. Okay. Almost to where I want it, and then we will show you the trick. So, what you do at this point is you take the cling film or Saran Wrap or whatever, you just lay it, you scrunch it up, and you lay it over the top. You kind of have to be careful near these edges, because sometimes this texture will bleed into the other side of your painting that you don't want the texture in. So just lay it down on top. I'm going to do this in two sections just because it's easier to do that way. Scrunch it up and then lay it how you want it, and you can kind of rearrange it a little bit once you have it down there, if there's certain directions you're wanting it to fall. So do that, and then I think I want to try to make it more vertical here. Okay, and then you put a nice heavy book on top of it, and you leave it for at least 15 minutes. I leave it for more like 30 just to make sure that it's dry enough. Okay, so the next step is taking off the book, and then you take all this off slowly, and what you have is a pretty cool texture. It works better on larger paintings, I do have to say, because this one is so small that the pattern looks pretty huge, but it works all right. So the next steps of what you would do is go back in and add some darker spots for shadows and things like that. To add, obviously, to add depth. So you would just go back in like this and add little areas to that. It's not an end-all be-all texture. It's more of a place where you can start. It's a jumping off point. And you can even glaze over it with lighter colors and come back in and then do your shadows as well. But it still works really nice for a texture. Because, I mean, look at that right there. There's no way that you're going to get that kind of texture by painting it. I mean, you could, but it would be like, it would take you a really long time. Sometimes you do have to watch out for this because the cling film did kind of like overlap over the rest of the painting. It kind of follows the cling film, and that doesn't always follow the lines of your drawing, so you kind of have to be a little bit careful. I mean, you could probably lift that once it's dry, if it just really bothered you, you know. I'm just continuing to add some shadows in here to make this a little bit more believable as, you know, a rock formation. But you don't want to cover up all of your other texture. If you do a glaze, you want to make sure that it's transparent enough to be able to see through, you know. I might do some dry brushing as well. But I think at this point you get the picture. But okay, so here's what it looks like dry and with the tape removed and with a little bit more detail added. I think you can see how the Saran Wrap gives you a nice base layer of textures that you can build on top of and add more shadows and more detail. And there you have it. There's a few more little tools or tricks of the trade to help you get some varying textures in your watercolors. It really could save you quite a lot of hassle and energy in your own work. So I hope you give it a shot. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all of that stuff, because that is literally and truly how this channel gets to grow and gets to be seen by more people. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.